us, no matter how immune any one of us might think we are. Can you give us an example that shows the admixture of error as well as the faith component? In other words, show us how good science can be the carrier of falsehood and how this can lead to destruction of truth in our minds as well as our hearts.
For this, I'd like to bring up the atom. Everyone thinks he knows that they're atoms, but here again, why? Has he seen one? Has he ever figured out there must be atoms? Again, for the most part, it's faith based on authority. Even more, it's unrecognized faith on the authority of science. It's blind faith.
Atoms truly exist and are very important, but yet most of us don't know of our own personal experience, by our own personal experience and understanding that atoms exist. But what is the admixture of error in our understanding of the atom?
Well, let me start by pointing out that atoms, we are told in textbooks and popular books, and that they're mostly nothing. Any textbook you might pick up might say something like the atom is filled with nothing. For example, if the nucleus were the size of a basketball, the electron flying around it would be 1 mile away. Well, should we shrink down and see what happens for ourselves?
What do you mean?
Well, come on, I'll show you. Okay, hold on to my hand.
Wait a second. Have you ever done this before?
Yeah, well, many times, sure, yeah.
Are there any strange anomalies?
Well, you know, sometimes funny things happen with shirts and ties, but are you ready?
Okay.
Okay, hang on. Here we go.
Hang on.
Here we go.
Get back here! Wow.
We made it.
So this is what we're made out of. Nothing, just like they've always said. Of course, I've always been told I'm full of hot air anyway.
Well, by this conception, it appears we are mostly made of nothing. Is it really possible, though, for something to be composed of nothing? Is man simply a pile of atoms? Now, a pile of atoms would be qualitatively the same as a single atom. After all, a pile of bricks, we remember, is qualitatively the same as a single brick. It's only simple number and how they're stacked or the arrangement that makes it different. And if a single atom is largely nothing, then we, being just an arrangement of those, are just...
Well, mostly nothing.
Yeah. That's the logical conclusion, and based on the way the evidence is often presented, that's what we naturally come to. Hence, we have the awful result.
That we're nothing. Well, then so much for all the doctrines of Christianity, and indeed everything that's truly human, and lots of what's non-human as well.
Yes, it can't get much more grim than that. Well, should we go back to regular size and finish examining this at regular, normal height?
I don't know. I think this is kind of interesting. I wonder if you'd like to play golf down in this atmosphere, because that's the problem. Those oxygen molecules are so big, I'm having a hard time keeping up with my breath.
Maybe that's a good reason.
All right, let's go back.
Okay, hang on. Here we go.
Move this way a little bit.
Okay, here we go.
That was something. It's no wonder that there are so many people without much hope, like the teenager we saw at the beginning of the show.
Of course, this is not what the science really means. Science in and of itself is good. But this is what comes across, and this is what sits in the back of people's minds and severely undermines their confidence in their ability to get to truth, the truth that we're made for. After all, we are so far from nothing that we can know about invisible things such as atoms. Yet the power of science is such that we carry around the emotions of angst and worry as if the nothingness of the atom was really all the dignity we had. There are huge industries built around trying to give us our confidence back, but few telling us what gifts we have that make us in the image of God. If made in the image of God are to be more than mere words, if we are to understand that God is more than mere words, we must be ready to see who and what we really are. If the image is mostly nothing, then the inevitable conclusion is that that which it is the image of, God, is mostly nothing.
Well, then is faith the answer?
Well, St. Thomas says grace presupposes nature. In this case, this means that we cannot believe something unless we first know something. If I want to tell you how I got here to EWTN Studios, then you must know something about planes and cars and people and other things to even get to the point of believing what I say.
On screen, we have some clips of children speaking that will be helpful to the audience.
I wonder what Daddy do.
Dad is in the Army, remember? He's fueling helicopters.
What? What helicopters? I do heard of them, but don't know what they are.
Don't you believe me, Johnny?
Don't know what you're talking about.
Johnny, you just need to believe me. Don't you trust me? Mommy said you should trust me.
Now, if Johnny were to say he believed at this point, he would be giving assent to nothing, to emptiness, for he doesn't know what fueling is or what a helicopter is. Now, it's not the words we notice that he doesn't know, it's the meanings that the words refer to that are not anywhere in his understanding. He doesn't know enough to believe. It's the same with doctrines. A doctrine cannot be understood unless you first know what the things are that the words refer to. This is why Pope St. Pius X said that if we once lose the basic principles of knowledge articulated by St. Thomas Aquinas, we will lose all the doctrines of the Church. Indeed, he said, we will not even understand the words in which the doctrines of the Church are formulated. We thus see that knowledge must come before faith, and we must come to see that the realm of faith and reason in the human realm as well as the theological realm are just as John Paul II says in Fides et Ratio. They're like two wings of a bird who can soar only when both are intact.
So we have entered on the path of wisdom in making a distinction between faith and knowledge. And we'll learn more about both of these in the next episode of The Science Before Science.
Yes, science in its broadest sense, which means all knowledge, is the key to any culture, and every civilization is based on knowledge. The Latin scientia means knowledge. Science, it used to be broad. It used to include all knowledge. It used to be called philosophy. Wisdom used to be an integral part of all sciences. That's why, for example, I have a remnant of the Middle Ages in my title. Doctor refers to my PhD, which is a doctor of philosophy in physics.
Yes, Doctor of Philosophy in Physics.
As Catholics, we can no longer neglect science, although we tend to do that a lot. Indeed, we must encourage Catholics to go into science. Science, scientia, is true knowledge.
This neglect of science has really led us, as we will see throughout the next episodes, to miss important truths.
And this in turn leads us into a moral abyss that we saw at the beginning of this first episode.
The music video at the beginning went through many of the problems that are plaguing our modern culture, from divorce to cloning. I've even heard that there is a new reality show about wife swapping. Imagine that. Infidelity is now reduced to a form of entertainment. Just more signs of our decaying civilization and the need for wisdom. And we have become so accustomed to these problems that we don't see their severity.
Yeah, it's like the proverbial frog in the water. It's said that if you put a frog in boiling water, you probably heard this, it will jump right out. But if you put it at room temperature water and then slowly turn up the temperature, you can cook the frog without it jumping out. By the time it realizes that it should get out, it's too drained of strength to do so or even to try. Our culture is like this with morality. If we were presented with any one of the moral dysfunctions of today, even 30 years ago, we would jump out of our skin. Yeah. Whereas now, well, it's just the way it is. Imagine being told, for example, that food and water can be withheld from the very sick, or that two men can get married. That just wasn't on the map when I was a child.
It would have been laughed off as extreme thinking. And that, in fact, was when the church warned of where certain of these errors were leading. It had to happen slowly, with people's idea gradually being affected by the errors in thinking that largely come from scientism, the misunderstanding of science.
Yeah. What we often don't realize is that these errors have been percolating for hundreds of years, advancing as science advanced, but not really part of science, but borrowing from its power. After all, error, falsehood, is just a perversion of a truth. The greater the truth, the greater the carrier of a perversion it can be, because there's more there to distort.
Let me try to summarize what we've said then. We have a failing culture, evidenced by various forms of moral decay that we've seen. Science is the head of our culture, the objective thinking center of our culture, and it has been made through misunderstanding of its domain and method into a carrier of deep philosophical error. Consequently, to avoid being a carrier of this error and hence a contributor to decay of our culture, every single one of us, without exception, needs to reestablish the proper philosophical ground in our thinking. We need wisdom. We need philosophy. Already in this episode, we have discovered a linchpin for this wisdom in our beginning to make the distinction between faith and knowledge. And we'll learn more about this in the episodes to come. And as we learn, we will see more clearly how our faith and our day-to-day tasks need to be part of an integrated whole. This integration applies to the community as well as it does to us. In particular, Catholics with a vocation to be physicists need to go into science with this very wisdom.
Yes, Catholics have a special responsibility since science came out of Catholic culture.
Before we look further at faith and knowledge, Dr. Rizzi, could you tell us a little about the history of science?
Sure, I'll give you the summary of the summary. Science, in the sense of understanding the world, really started with the Greeks. Aristotle is the one who first understood the physical world at the most general level, teaching us what matter is. His student, in turn, started this museum. Now, a museum is kind of a center for scholars. He started it in Alexandria, which produced the Greeks you were probably familiar with, like Euclid. Everyone knows that name. Hero, Aristarchus, Archimedes, probably lots of you know that name. Eratosthenes. These men made advances largely in what we would now call today statics. Now, statics just means the study of things that are at rest. However, the Greek culture could not sustain science, nor did they make any headway in the study of motion, which is really a key aspect of matter, which needed the concept of inertia to move forward, no pun. Inertia is that property of things that keeps it moving after you've, say, you throw a baseball. It keeps moving after you release it. It wasn't until Christian culture came into its own that this concept was developed. It took the Christian understanding that the world is good and that nature is created by God and thus good and intelligible and understandable by us for science to really become part of civilization. The incarnation, of course, made it impossible for a consistent Christian to deny the goodness and intelligibility of the world. God became man, after all, took on human flesh. The enculturation of these ideas was crucial to what Father Stanley Yackey calls the first live birth of science, which happened in Catholic Europe. Indeed, in the Middle Ages, inertia was uncovered and used to explain how the Earth and other planets might be able to move as part of a system around the sun. The medievals answered key objections and solved most of the key problems with the heliocentric system, which Galileo and others will, with little comment, so they didn't give credit to them, adopt as their own. Indeed, though most medieval scholars are aware of this, most others did not give all the credit, do give all the credit to Galileo and don't even realize the magnitude of the importance of the science of the Middle Ages as a result.
So this again puts an onus on us to encourage Catholics who have a vocation in science to follow through and become part of this head of our culture.
Hello, this is Governor Jeb Bush. The state of Florida has the privilege of being home to NASA's Kennedy Space Center and the newly created Space Florida, a new entity that will be the state's single point of contact for space initiatives. Many of you have joined me in watching, either in person or on television, the launching of a spacecraft or shuttle. From the Apollo missions, which put the first man on the moon, to satellites that connect the world, to spacecrafts that perform incredible experiments, science and technology have affected us all beyond space missions. I joined the Institute for Advanced Physics in encouraging you to help prepare the next generation of scientists.
We'll see you next time as we explore more of science and the science before it with Dr. Anthony Rizzi of the Institute for Advanced Physics.